The U.S. economy grew at a slower pace than forecast in the first quarter. Gross domestic product, the value of all goods and services, rose 2.2%. Economists surveyed by Bloomberg were expecting growth of 2.5%. Joining us now from Boston is Nigel Gault, chief U.S. economist at IHS Global Insight. Nigel, welcome to Bottom Line. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks, Mark.
Nigel, what does today's GDP number tell us about the pace of job creation?
I think it tells us that at the start of this year, job creation was running rather faster than the growth in the overall economy. So it looks, if we look at the first quarter overall, we probably had a drop there in productivity. And I think that what the GDP is telling us that unless we get GDP growth much faster, we're not going to be seeing sustained job creation in the 200,000 plus region, which we got for a few months. And we're going to settle down to a lower pace.
Well, Nigel, even with wages remaining flat, consumers spent at the fastest pace than more than a year. Why do you suppose that was?
I think the biggest thing boosting consumer spending was the vehicle sector. Clearly, that was a big plus. We've had consumers, their vehicles wearing out, haven't replaced for a long time. A number of them have been willing to step up, and they have been increasing vehicle spending quite sharply. Question for the future, what happens to vehicle spending going forward? We've had a big burst, probably going to flatten out a bit right now.
Well, as you mentioned, it's been 2 straight quarters that we've been seeing strong growth in auto sales. Is this more about mild weather than it is about consumer spending habits?
Excuse me, I think the mild weather helped a lot in the first quarter. Clearly it was the warmest first quarter on record. It probably did help us get that 15 million sales rate in February. And I think it's consistent with the idea that we'll slow down to a more modest pace in Q2. But the underlying trend is clear. Vehicle sales are trending higher. But we had an extra boost in there from the weather.
Nigel, let's talk about the Fed for a minute. Is the whisper of further Fed action in the form of another round of quantitative easing, is that whisper now getting louder?
Clearly the headline GDP moves in that direction, but let's go. If we're going to a little more detail here, what was the big disappointment in GDP? I think it was really that defense spending fell when most analysts expected that to go up.
Exactly.
Private sector growth was rather stronger. So I think the Fed would need to see quite a bit more evidence of weakness before it'd be ready to jump with more easing.
Well, as you know, Nigel, today's GDP number is an initial estimate. When that number is updated in May and June, what might it look like?
It's very hard to say. I mean, defense was the big surprise, but they've really got all the evidence in on defense, so that may well not change. The big question is going to be what happens to the trade deficit in March. Does that widen as anticipated? And what happens to inventories? But I've got no particular prior notion right now as to whether that's going to be, GDP is going to get revised up or down.
Nigel, were you surprised at how housing seemed to perform in the first quarter? A lot of people were.
I wasn't surprised with the numbers that we saw today, no. Housing was certainly helped by the good weather, and we've seen improvement in housing starts. And I suspect when we see the details, we're probably going to find that residential improvements did really well. That's consistent with what we saw on building materials. And again, the weather's very important there.
Nigel, if we could, let's go overseas in our last minute. Today in Spain, the government said that unemployment rose to 24.4% in the first quarter. That number was 22.9% in the fourth quarter of 2011. And yesterday, S&P downgraded Spain's debt. Spain's economy is double the size of the combined economies of Greece, Ireland, and Portugal, and all of which they had to be bailed out. Spain's austerity measures already cutting to the bone. A lot of people are suffering. Is Spain in depression territory?
Well, I think unemployment in the mid-20s and a youth unemployment rate in the 45 to 50% region certainly is moving towards that sort of territory. And it's very, very difficult to see how they get out of it, how they actually start to generate growth. Because at least with the deepening austerity, that's really just making the economy even worse. A very, very serious situation there.